SMEs across the world are in search of their X factor to allow them to stand out from the competition. Increasing efficiency, raising profits, maintaining customer loyalty are top of the priority list for many SMEs, but they're also in search of that little extra to give them a unique brand identity in their respective competitive fields. Joining us to discuss further from Johannesburg, South Africa, is the CEO of Hesed Consulting, Vumi Msweli, award-winning career coach as well. Vumi, good morning. Well, actually, it's afternoon in Johannesburg. Good afternoon to you. So what is the X factor, Vumi?
Good afternoon, Aroja. So the X factor for me is your unique selling proposition. It's that thing you do better than anybody else. It's the reason your customers come to you. It's almost a little bit inherent in how you go about doing your business. So the X factor is something you can't purchase, and in organizations, we often find that X factor infiltrates throughout the culture of that organization. It's that secret spice, I suppose, in KFC. It's why Alibaba is probably one of the biggest growing tech companies, and it's why a lot of people around the globe choose to use the likes of an Amazon.
So what is the, I guess, difference between a business X factor, unique selling proposition, and a business competitive advantage?
So your unique selling proposition is why someone would come to you, okay? It's the edge you have above your competitors. So if your competitors are saying, listen, we're selling the exact same product, but our unique selling proposition is how quickly we can get to the market. It can be a case of how well we tend to execute our things. So your unique selling proposition is you're up against your competitors. Your competitive advantage is similar to your unique selling proposition, but it's what is unique to you, right? So your competitive advantage, in essence, is something that you can often replicate throughout geographical locations, and that gives you an edge about your competitors, but it's not necessarily your unique selling proposition. It's not necessarily the thing that people come to you for. So that's your competitive advantage. It could be something like speed. And then your X factor, for me, is the how you go about doing things, right? Your unique selling proposition is what it is that you're selling. The X factor is the how you go about selling what it is that you're selling. So that, for me, USP, think what, X factor, think how.
Great stuff. And what should determine a business unique selling proposition?
For me, it's identifying what the problem is. What is the problem your business is, in essence, solving? I think this is what allows us to really shift and change as organizations to continue being relevant in the future. A good example I like to use is that of Twitter. You know, at some point, they were going to be a podcasting platform, and they quickly realized that actually this is not going to work for us because someone else had a competitive advantage, was first to market, and that, of course, was Apple. So they then had to come back and say, what is it that we do? And what we do is allow people to share their thoughts. Let's do that on another platform. And it went from Odeo to Twitter. And that's how the organization reshifted itself. And that's exactly how you go about solving what is my unique selling proposition? What problem am I solving? And can I do this on various platforms? And can I do this if the face of work changes, like we've seen happen in the times of COVID?
And okay, so I'm glad you used that example. Twitter initially wanting to be a podcast platform, then realizing this wasn't going to work. So using that, how can a business determine what its X factor is?
A good place to start is asking your customers, why do you choose us? Often we think our organization is choosing us because we are the best at what we do. Not necessarily. I guess it's called, a good example is the milkshake example, where every morning at some particular shop in mid-America, they have a long list of people buying milkshakes. And it's like, why are you buying milkshakes? Why are you choosing us? You guys are convenient, and I don't want to have breakfast, but I want something that'll fill my tummy. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, this is why we should focus on doing milkshakes as opposed to waffles and ice cream. Asking your actual consumers why they choose you allows you to sharpen up that USP. Because often you think what makes you unique isn't what is why your clients are actually buying you. So going back to basics, engaging your consumers, and not just your consumers today, but potentially your consumers for the future.
And should businesses consider modeling their unique selling points after the competition, after other businesses?
Definitely. I think it's very, very important that we study our competitors. It allows us to see why people are choosing our competitors and for us to really ramp up our strengths. It also allows us to see who our competitors are. Often we think our competitors are the people in the same industry as us. And as we've seen, with technology, that your competitors are sometimes people who are coming completely out of the blue. I don't think the pilots thought that the drone would take them out when it comes to taking photography photos. So looking across industries to analyze who your current competitors are, who your future competitors are, how do you then shift and change and adapt your unique selling proposition, work on that X factor to retain your clients and grow your market share.
All right, good stuff. So when can a business consider a cost leadership strategy or a differentiation leadership strategy when determining their X factor or their unique selling proposition?
I think it really does look at your industry, right? So if you're noticing that the trends in your industry, your profit margins are really starting to get very, very thin, then cost differentiation could be something that is very, very important. If you're going to go from a differentiation perspective, you're also looking at what is my X factor? What is the majority of my consumers needing from me? Are they willing to pay that premium? Or is that differentiation factor really, really going to catapult me ahead of my competitors? It's not always a cost game. If you can really articulate that value and that X factor is very, very inherent, we will gladly pay a premium. I like to use the example, probably because I'm a former banker myself, of banking. Lots of us are quite happy to pay that extra, $100 per month purely because you get a private banker and you don't want to join the queue and in a normal branch. So you're willing to pay the premium. Somebody else might say that's actually not that important to me. So going back to your consumers, looking at your industry, understanding the trends will then help you decide what's your differentiation factor or your cost differentiation factor in looking at that X factor and reaching your consumers.
Okay, so then if after you've picked or discovered your X factor, is it then necessary to review it? Can it change?
It definitely can. What was a differentiator, what was an X factor that worked well historically does not necessarily work well now. We're seeing this with the massive trend, specifically with Chinese organizations, where that culture, which is an X factor that works for them in their region, when they try to transport that culture across the sea, all of a sudden it's a problem because the cultural norms, societal norms are not the same. It actually works to their disadvantage. Your X factor has to be adaptable to the region you find yourself, to your consumer, and to, in essence, the industry you find yourself as well. What worked for you yesterday is not going to get you where you need to be as an organization tomorrow. So you have to get very, very comfortable in differentiating that. Good example, of course, is the likes of Amazon. If all they said is our X factor is how well we can get books to you, we wouldn't have the Amazon giant that we have today.
Very true. Amazon Web Services, AWS, is a big player in that space. Can you talk to us about managing customer expectations and client satisfaction in business?
So in managing customer expectations, for me, there are two things we have to be considerate of. One is, where is our customer currently in the customer journey, and understanding that our customer is not interested in comparing us to our competitor in our industry. They're comparing us to everybody that they are a customer of. So you might be a motor vehicle company, but I'm going to compare you as to how my bank treats me, because that's the kind of customer experience I've become accustomed to. So looking at your customer journey, I want you to look not solely at your industry, but looking at your customer across the board and the other customer experiences. That becomes very, very important. The second thing in looking at the customer journey for me and the customer experience that becomes important is, don't make your customers' problems, your problems, your customers' problems. What do you have to do in the back end to shift that experience is what you need to do. We've seen a lot of this. A lot of organizations are now able to converse with someone on WhatsApp. And for the longest time, some of the older institutions were saying, no, that doesn't work for me. You come into the branch, you do this, and it does not work. And in essence, we've just seen people automatically leave. And because sometimes we've got geographical advantage, we think they can't leave, not realizing we're now in a global economy and people are leaving. I've seen this across a number of my clients who simply say, I'm not happy with this bank in this particular country, and they simply move to another country because it's easier to do business. So this becomes very, very important in how you're engaging your customer. Look at that customer journey. Does it truly reflect your X factor and how your customer wants to be treated? They might stay with you and tolerate you, but if they're not passionate about your brand and what it is that you're doing and wanting to sponsor your brand, you will soon see them departing in the coming years.
Very, very informative discussion. The X factor for businesses around the world. Vumi Nsoli, CEO, Hesed Consulting in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.